Captain Picard. Priority 1 message from Starfleet coming in on secured channel.
My Readier Room.
Hello, and welcome to the Readier Room, not to be confused with Continuing Mission. Ours is the only TNG rewatch podcast made by people who were there to watch the magic happen on set. My name is Mitchell Mills, Chief Consultant of Services at Paramount, and with me is my life partner, Brandon Hobbs, former Head of Resources Management. Brandon, how are we doing today on this day, the birthday of the Emperor?
Oh, doing great, Mitch.
We're all very excited, right?
Very excited, but, before we get into the exciting stuff, I think there's something we need to talk about. I just want to extend to our amazing audience my sincerest apologies for the late recording of this episode.
Yeah, there's
and I think it's important for us to be upfront about exactly what happened.
Right.
And so the truth is, audience, that I know this is going to be tough for you, Mitch, but Mitch has a bit of a poker addiction, right? And you said you'd prepared a statement today. If you want to share that.
Yeah, it's difficult to come to terms with one's demons like this. But I just wanted to tell everybody out there that gambling addiction is a very real thing, and there's no shame in needing to get help. There's no shame in admitting that you have a problem. If you ever find yourself taken away from your obligations just for seeking the thrill of gambling and winning, then that's a very good sign that you might be suffering from this kind of deep addiction. So they have Gamblers Anonymous. You can reach out to their website, their phone number, 1-888-354-2679, and really get the help that you do need. If you even suspect that this might be you, I recommend looking into it. If you suspect that a loved one might have this problem, then please get them the help, because they desperately need it. But because of that, we were unable to record at our usual time. We're recording now, and hopefully we can move forward from this and not cause any more disturbances in our listeners' schedule. So my sincerest apologies on that one.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Mitch. And as your life partner, I will make sure to support you always.
Thank you. I cherish that connection that we share. So today's episode is called Lonely Among Us, episode 6, I believe, of TNG.
Yes.
Episode 6. Okay. And this one has a history of being pretty maligned by press and fans alike. And watching it, you can understand why, I think. To peel back the layers a bit and talk about the structure of television writing, and I think you mentioned this on previous episodes, that there's always the A plot and the B plot, and in a good episode of anything, those two things will work in harmony together. Sometimes they'll intersect, sometimes they'll just thematically support each other, but they will work together to create a better final product. This episode is a very, very good example of those two elements not working together at all, and one of them just drags down the other one immensely, and in fact ruins the final product.
Yes, and we'll obviously get into this in more depth later on, but the A-plot's pretty decent in this episode.
Yeah.
I think we can both agree on that. It has a few missteps, but overall nothing too terrible. The B-plot is probably the worst we've seen so far, I think.
Yeah, I would put those scenes as not just the worst, but also the most confusing of anything on TNG so far. You watch them, and it's just a lot of like, what?
Yeah. And so in its conceptual stages, the script of this episode actually called for the B plot being something like the Enterprise having just vague engineering problems or something.
Right.
Which is boring, but it makes sense.
It's
you
also
can kind of fit it around.
It's also the good kind of boring, I think. Like, I'll tolerate some amount of boring in my Star Trek, and if the boring is like, spacey science kind of stuff, like, oh, we got to realign the tachyon beam. Like, all right, that's fine.
But it's like you see this stuff even in like pretty decent episodes where the B plot is kind of barely a consideration. Like the first thing that comes to mind is what was it? Data's Day.
Which one was Data's Day?
If I'm getting the episode title correct, that's the one where he tries to have a relationship with a woman. Oh, and then the B plot is the other crew finding a woman stuck in the middle of a floor.
Yes.
You remember that?
I do remember that.
Yeah. And it's just like, it makes no sense, but it's like, it's so unobstructive to the actual A plot that it's like, whatever.
Well, I think talking about that episode, yes, the plot events aren't obstructive, but I think tonally, those two are quite at odds, because
I guess it is a little weird.
The B plot is like pretty kind of body horror-ish, like people getting like beamed into floors and walls or whatever, and it's kind of like freaky imagery, and then it smash cuts to like Data pretending to be Ricky Ricardo, because that's the information he's collected on relationships.
Right, but I guess my whole point here is that so much time is spent on this B plot for absolutely zero resolution.
Yes, and I guess when we talk about the end of the episode, we'll talk about that more specifically, but that's the lack of payoff, I think, is really what is the final nail in the coffin, not just chronologically, but thematically in that. None of this was worth it. So why don't we talk a little bit about what these A plots and B plots are? Some details. So the episode actually starts more with its B plot. There's a reference to the the Enterprise's current mission, which is to host like a diplomatic meeting or bring a bunch of diplomats to a meeting of some sort. And the diplomats are split between these two different feuding alien races. One of which looks like a bunch of dogs, and the other one looks like a bunch of lizards. Not where you might think that was going.
which is interesting. I mean, you'll remember, right? The critical reaction to this was not good.
No, it was very, very extremely negative.
So when this episode aired, we had a lot of critics haranguing us over the use of these two alien races, because it was an interesting setup. Right, but as the critics noted, and as we just noted as well, it really went nowhere. Why were the dogs and lizards fighting? Why were they trying to eat each other?
And they were trying to eat each other, by the way.
They were trying to eat each other.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that. And just generally, like, the amount of screen time they had was bizarre. And this was actually, you wouldn't believe this, audience, this was actually the fault of our wardrobe department. Because at first it was supposed to be like a comment on race relations, because we were supposed to have a race of dog people, yes, but also a race of cat people. Actually, the Caitians, right?
That's a deep cut.
Yeah. What was this? The second time we tried to bring them back?
I believe so. There was a lot of love for the Caitians on set. It's like, when are we going to get them in? When are we going to get them in? But, one thing always blocked it, another thing came up, and it just never happened.
Right. And so when you look at like a race of dog and cat people, the symbolism, it's very obvious, very relatable for most viewers. I mean, everyone knows how dogs and cats feel about each other, right?
Right. Oh, it's raining cats and dogs. Oh.
I don't think that has anything to do with how cats and dogs feel about each other.
Oh, jeez.
Mitch, what am I going to do with you? So anyway, our wardrobe department just completely failed to produce a camera-ready cat alien. So the entire idea just got thrown to the wayside, and we had to fall back on these lizard costumes we'd had planned for later in the season.
Right.
And so, the race relations commentary was just completely lost in the mire of head scratching that was every single one of their scenes.
Right, because you watch it, when the two races meet each other, they instantly just have like they're like throwing petty insults at one another. They're like alluding to violence, and it happens like so fast that you're saying like, what? Okay, I guess they hate each other. I guess these lizards and dogs, which to my knowledge has never really interacted in nature, just don't like each other for some reason. And then the lizards are like, oh, I smell the dogs. And it's like, do lizards smell? Don't they just like kind of use their tongues for that? Like,
they do use their tongues for that.
Right.
And so like it's particularly odd to have two races of aliens, and this is just like from a meta perspective, two races of aliens introduced in one episode that are both completely masked.
Yeah.
And I actually think Gene, that was like one of Gene's rules, was not to do that.
To have several masked aliens together at once.
Yeah. Because it is. Don't you think so? It is kind of weird to watch, like from an audience perspective.
Well, yeah, because you don't get the emoting that you would with a human face.
Yeah.
So you can like see human eyes coming in from behind the masks, but those just like never look right because of how artificial the masks and prosthetics are. So it makes sense that you put like a Klingon on the screen or a Romulan, you can, that actor has, they have their face to work with. They can really enhance the scene. But everything else is just super stilted. It reminds me of, what was it? I think it was Michael Keaton's Batman, where he couldn't move his neck, and like every scene he was in was just like rotating around, very silly. The more human elements you remove from an actor's performance, the more stilted it's inherently going to be. And that compounds when you have several of those races coming together, or several of those costumes coming together. So it's a good rule to have. Sucks that we broke it here.
It definitely does suck. And we spend a lot more time with the dog people than we do the lizard people.
Well, that was a function of how many dog costumes we had, right?
Well, yeah, workable dog costumes. I mean, the lizard costumes were in no way ready by the time we needed to fall back on them. So we only had a couple ones actually functioning the way we wanted them to. So I think, if I remember correctly, we kind of did away with a lot of the lizard scenes.
Thank God for that. Like, yes, this is a plot that ultimately is not resolved. And while you might think that adding additional scenes with these characters, these diplomats, would help the resolution of it, let me tell you, the answer to this episode was not to increase the amount of screen time those guys got. That would only have exacerbated things.
Certainly not. And I do want to mention, while we're here, the little spat that Riker has with the dog people and their inclination to eat meat.
Yes.
Because this is probably the one thing that does have some kind of horrible payoff in the end. But Riker has a little row with the dog people because they've requested to have I guess a bunch of animals loaded on to the Enterprise so they can eat them.
Right. And
I guess I never really thought about this, but Trek is a post-meat society. So
I like that idea because it's the logical conclusion of the replicators. Once you have this technology, then logically there's no reason to have livestock for things like meat and whatnot.
And it was just a little heavy-handed, especially considering how many times we deal with stuff like the Prime Directive, and I don't know, maybe like not being so judgmental about the species that are behind yours in terms of development. Felt a little off to me.
It's really funny because they'll be like, oh, we've moved beyond enslaving animals to meet our needs. and he looks down on the dogs for eating meat. And then they'll go visit like the Klingon planet where they have like trial by combat, and it's everything's brutal. And then they're like, well, these are the Klingon ways. We must respect their traditions.
We have to respect them. Now,
Yes.
everything's political.
Right. So I guess the moral of the story is that the Federation will respect you if you have enough firepower to contend with them. If you're not, then they'll just turn up their noses.
Sounds about right, actually.
Really, really good allegory for the real world.
Yeah. I cannot believe it wasn't intentional.
It's one of those beautiful accidents.
So moving on, we get introduced to the A plot.
Thank God.
Thank God.
Yeah. So the Enterprise is traveling, and it encounters like a big ball of floating energy. It's just like a big ball of gas almost in the middle of space. And they're like, should we fly around it? And Picard's like, no, just fly through it. Fucking idiot. And that's what they do. And wouldn't you know it, that ends up having adverse consequences on their next couple of days. But doing that introduces like this kind of entity to the Enterprise that first, I believe it first gets into their computers, and then it starts possessing different people around the ship. I think with Worf.
Yeah.
It does
Yeah,
something
it gets
to Worf,
Worf
like it knocks Worf out, maybe?
Yeah, it knocks him out, yeah. So he's standing up doing, I don't know, computer stuff, because Picard told him to stop being an idiot.
Right, because Worf needed an excuse in the script to be doing work.
Exactly. In one of those little side rooms that you don't really ever come to understand the function of.
Right.
And he touches a computer on the wall, and the thing infects him, and we're treated to some exquisite acting from Michael Dorn here.
I believe he submitted that scene for Emmy consideration.
Yeah, I mean, he should have. It was, I mean, my jaw dropped that day.
It's not easy to do a scream on set, take after take after take. It takes a really powerful set of pipes like those of the late.
It definitely does, and he was always really good about that.
He was. If we needed a screamer, we'd call Michael. That's how it always went. It was good. So, but he gets knocked out, and at this point, nobody's really aware of the problem with the ship. I think maybe there's some issue with the engines, but it's not seen as like super serious. But Worf gets taken in to Dr. Crusher's office to get examined because he's injured, of course. And there we see what is somehow only the second most baffling costuming of the episode, after the terrible lizard outfits. I think the power ranking would be the lizard outfits were the worst, then the Crusher thing, I'll get to in a moment, and then the dogs.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, so we go in there, and Crusher's got like a terribly plastic, really small helmet with like a visor on it. And it's one of the worst props we've ever had in the show. And
yeah,
it's incredibly obviously bad. Like nobody in the business would make this. If you were going to make this, you would paint it like a less plasticky, conspicuous color. You would add on a few more accessories. You would make it the size of Gates's head instead of a small childlike size, so she looks ridiculous. All of these flaws with it, and all of them make sense when you consider how we got the damn thing. So the first time we filmed this scene, it was very, very typical TNG. Worf's lying there. Dr. Crusher's is kind of holding over the tricorder scanner thing on him. Same thing that they always do. Exactly how it always is. And on that day, one of our producers was on set, and he was watching it, and he was kind of looking at a clipboard, reviewing some notes of his. And while we're filming, he goes to Gene. They talk, and Gene kind of nods along. All right, okay. They break up, and then Gene comes in, interrupts the shot. He's like, okay, the scene's good. We need to do this scene a little more, spacey, a little more sci-fi. What do we got? And everybody just looks at him. It's like, well, Gene, what the hell are you talking about? I'm operating on a friggin' Klingon here. Of course it's sci-fi. Gene wasn't enough. The producers kind of shakes his head. Gene insists.
Not obvious enough.
Right. So it ultimately comes down, like, we can't rewrite the dialogue, and we can't change any of the characters, right? Because Worf's the one we filmed getting attacked. There's only one doctor on the ship, so it's like, okay, what if we change the costumes and the props and stuff? So we go to the prop guy. Prop guy kind of like throws his hands up. He had done all his work on the episode. Now he's served this whole thing, and he eventually goes home to think about it. Wrap shooting for the day. It's not going to happen. He comes back the next day with this thing, this stupid helmet, and he's like, all right, Gates, put this on. We're going to film with this. And, actors, they just do what they're told. But, other people came up to him just idly talking. It's like, where'd you get that? How'd you make that so fast? And he's like, nah, I just got it from my kid's fucking toy chest. It was... I don't know if it was a genius move or one of petty revenge, in a way. Because I get it. We all have these difficult problems on the job. And sometimes you just need the quick and dirty answer. You're not always going to be able to nail it.
Right.
But part of me always thought it was a bit intentional. Because I know how overworked that guy was. And I know the resources he had with, connections around the industry. And we've done things like that before. Like, we need something at the last minute. Some other show help us out.
Right.
But this was almost intentional. I don't want to say sabotage, but it kind of was.
Well, I mean, you remember the fight he got into with Gene about the teacups.
Yeah, I do. And I think that sentiment was lingering, which is kind of what motivated this.
Yeah, I don't think, by this point, I think he was really starting to just get a little bit pissed off about these last-minute demands.
What's funny is that he was basically saved. So, yeah, that prop looks terrible, but when you stick it in an episode with those terrible, terrible alien costumes, it hides it a little bit, Like, everything looks bad in this episode. Which I think is what it was the only thing that saved him from not getting fired, saved him from getting fired, rather. Saved his job. He's a very lucky guy, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great, like we said, like just a few minutes before, those lizard aliens looked so bad that nothing could really reach that level in this episode. That's a great point.
Amazing. And considering the work that he would later go on to do for the series, in later seasons, it's very lucky for all of us, not just for him.
For all of us.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can only imagine what TNG would have ended up looking like if somebody else was the one, creating our props. Things like, the strange artifacts that Picard comes to obsess over in later seasons.
Right.
The different kinds of phasers and weapons that the Klingons and Romulans used. Disruptors, Romulans. Like, that was all him. It would have all been completely different with somebody else.
It definitely would have. Yeah, we lucked out with this episode, that's for sure.
It's a real butterfly effect.
We have something to thank.
Yeah.
Here.
So anyway, that's that scene. They're looking over Worf, like, Worf, you're completely okay. What's going on? And then Crusher touches Worf, and then the thing that had possessed Worf via that attack moves to Crusher.
So
Dr. Crusher.
The whole conceit of this energy being's goal is to find the captain, right?
Its
find
goal,
the captain of the ship.
Its goal is to make it back to where it came from, and I think via finding the captain is the easiest way for it to do that.
Right.
I don't know if there's like a really logical progression in like starting with Worf, going to Crusher, going to the computer, where it ultimately goes.
Yeah, I don't think it's logical. So, but that's the ultimate goal of it. Yeah. That's all.
Which, is cool. Like, this is the A plot, and we mentioned before that this one works a lot more than the B plot.
Yeah, it's actually a cool idea, and it actually ends up giving us a very cool scene for, a couple of minutes before it falls in on itself later on.
Yeah. But that's an example of this paying off, ramping up, the stakes increasing, and that's actually a good part of the progression. You care more when Crusher's infected versus Worf than when it's in the ship's computer. You're like, oh my god, what's going to do to the ship? It ends up taking somebody's life, and then it goes to Picard, which is like the real climax of things. Like, oh my god, Picard's compromised. Jesus.
Yeah, which is a big thing, because Picard up until this point hadn't really been put in such a vulnerable position.
I don't think at all.
Yeah. Well, he was having like delusions in the last episode.
True. But okay, so Picard being in a vulnerable position that the rest of the crew is not also in.
Yeah. Right. That's a good way to put it.
Right.
Yeah, and so you as the audience are kind of self-inserting as the rest of the crew here, watching the captain go completely insane.
Right.
But in any case, we'll talk about that when we get to it. So Crusher goes up to the bridge, right? Acts very suspicious as she saunters over to one of the computers that Data is working next to.
Yes.
And Data is briefly concerned about her being there, and then just seems to not care.
Yeah, he says something like, I don't even remember what his line is, but he comments on her working next to him.
But yeah, because she tells Picard that she's going to have to run some more. She's gonna have to do more research on Klingon physiology or something to help Worf.
Right. So she needs.
But
to use
instead,
the computers.
she looked up like navigational routes or something like that, and Data makes a comment on that. He says, I don't understand what one has to do with the other, and then doesn't do anything about it. That's all. He just says it and just goes back to his business.
Which
very
makes you
convenient.
wonder, why have him comment on that at all?
Exactly. Why not just leave her alone? I'm not sure if we were trying to help along the more stupid people in our audience.
Well,
here,
that happens very, very often.
It does happen.
I mean, a good example of that is the whole, the Sherlock Holmes thing that happens later in the episode.
Oh my god, the Sherlock stuff.
So, and this would have been actually a cool way to lead into that. I mean, cool relative to how stupid it is, but later on in the episode, Data.
He just became British, Mitch.
So Data takes on the persona of Sherlock Holmes because there's somewhat of a mystery on board between all the diplomatic stuff and the engine problems that the entity on board ends up causing. So Data's like, oh, I'm going to solve this, and to solve this, I'm going to take on to become like the greatest detective in our records, Sherlock Holmes. So he takes out a pipe and he starts, talking exactly like him, and it's a whole thing. And now it could have been like, oh, I observed Dr. Crusher at navigation when she was saying that she was looking for Klingon physiology, and that's a clue for this. And no, that never paid off.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the Sherlock Holmes stuff was originally going to be a little different. It was originally going to be Poirot, his name?
Oh, Death on the Nile.
Yes. From the Agatha Christie series. A series of books. And because he was a detective that our writer staff and really a lot of mystery buffs, I cannot talk today. Mystery buffs really, really enjoy. If you get into the nitty gritty of it, and I hold this opinion too, those Agatha Christie novels are a lot more engaging than any of the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stuff.
Much more geared towards the intellectual mystery fan, I would say.
Yes. So that was what Data was going to be. He was going to take that character on, and we were all kind of excited about that. There were a lot of small references to the different books that he appeared in. It was going to be cool and a little love letter to anybody who was into that series. But the thing is that this kind of clashed with Gene's ideals for what the show was. Like the way that he stated in the little Star Trek Bible that all the writers had to refer to was that the show really had to be approachable by people who, quote, had likely never picked up a book in their life.
That's right.
We didn't want to exclude anybody. And when you base an entire small subplot on a series of, pretty old books, no one's going to get it unless they've, done a little legwork and educating themselves throughout their life. And Gene did not want that to be the prerequisite to enjoying Star Trek. So that made it pretty far through the different revisions of the script, but at some point it got axed, and they're like, okay, well, everybody knows Sherlock Holmes, right? That'll be fine, right? And it was kind of with an eye roll that was added into the last few drafts, and ultimately what we see on screen here.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a shame in actually a couple ways, because not only did we lose out on that, what I think was a very cool Poirot reference, but this episode really opened the floodgates for a certain someone.
Oh, this guy.
Our favorite Sherlock Holmes fan. So the story goes that one fan absolutely loved the Sherlock Holmes stuff in this episode, right? And after it aired, he would contact writers and proposition them to write, another Sherlock Holmes episode, and he told them he would pay them for it. He really liked seeing the TNG crew talk about Sherlock Holmes. I'm not sure if it was a sexual thing or what, but every time we got a new writer, they got tons of letters from this guy. So it was almost a rite of passage, right?
Yeah, anytime someone was in the writing room, they're like, I got this weird letter recently, and everybody would just kind of laugh. But it was basically harassment. Have you ever heard?
They just keep coming.
They just
keep coming. No, go ahead.
Have you ever heard Gates' story about this guy?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, so this was during the show's run, towards the end of it. A few of the stars are at like a convention, and they're doing a Q&A. And there's like a whole panel of them. Audience is sitting in front, a bunch of chairs, pretty typical scene. And I think it was Marina Sirtis was fielding some questions, and some guy like raises his hand, goes up to the microphone, and he starts asking her if she's ever read any of the Star Trek Holmes books. And she answers like, I read one or two. And he just like instantly jumps on. He's like, oh, what's your favorite one? And it becomes like a pretty aggressive back and forth. Everybody in the room is kind of getting like a little uncomfortable.
That sounds very uncomfortable.
Right. And it was Gates, who had spent a lot of time talking to the writers, who had heard stories of this guy before, and like a light bulb goes off. She's like, oh, that's the guy. So she stands up and like, points at him. It's like, you're the one who's been harassing our writers. And instantly the guy just like stands up and starts like waddling out of the room. It was crazy.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really quick thinking.
Because God, he gave everyone so much grief.
It never stopped.
The mailroom was not fun.
No.
I mean, the mailroom's never really fun. But
the worst.
Anytime we would have a Sherlock episode, and that's the worst part about this.
Yeah. Is
that some of these episodes actually made it onto the screen. I don't know who was accepting this money, these bribes, to make these episodes, but it's such a black stain on the series that this degenerate fan could influence the series to such a degree based on something that was supposed to be just a one-off thing.
It's a crime against humanity that
really
Moriarty has a page on the Star Trek Wikipedia.
Absolutely genius stuff. High level, high concept stuff here. I'm very excited to watch that episode again.
Anytime the Enterprise crew puts on those silly Victorian era costumes, I always try to take a sick day.
It tended to just be an excuse to not have to write something.
Ugh.
You just steal a script from, an old mystery novel.
Literally just adapt it.
You're adapting it, and then something goes wrong with the holodeck, right? And that's your plot.
They would change like in the mystery novel while adapting it, they would just like copy large chunks of text, change the word mansion to holodeck, and that's how you write a Star Trek episode.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Other
Really lazy stuff.
other series would have like, oh, it's the clip show episode every season, and people would they would tune out, they would kind of get frustrated, like, why are you wasting our time with this? The Sherlock Holmes stuff kind of ended up being our equivalent of that, even if it was kind of made through nefarious channels. It
essentially was, and that's probably why they jumped on it so readily, because I think, and it is actually pretty smart, but I think they did realize that it would be a good replacement for clip shows.
Yeah. And it's kind of masking it to the audience, because, it looks like a news story for the show. It looks like it's something that we put effort into, when it couldn't be further from the truth.
Right, it's really just not. And this applies to pretty much every period piece episode that works its way into any season.
Do you remember when they did that for the cross-season two-parter? So between, I believe, seasons 6 and 7, it was one of those period piece episodes. Like, Data goes back in time, meets Mark Twain, of all people.
That's right. That's right. Wow. Yeah, I totally forgot about that one.
Yeah, it's after that, it's easy to see why we got canceled in season 7.
Yeah, definitely. We weren't gonna last much longer after that.
No. It was the Mark Twain in the coal mine that alerted us to the series death.
So anyway, Crusher is relieved of her possession by the alien, right?
Right, when she touches the console, and it goes into that.
She seems very concerned, because she's just woken up, basically, on the bridge. She has no idea why or how she got there. And then, almost immediately after, in her scene with Wesley there, she shows absolutely zero concern for the fact that she was possessed.
Yeah.
She's not investigating it. She's just sitting on the couch reading her book or something. I do want to note another nomination for our People Walking into Other People's Rooms contest.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
So there's that. Interesting bit about this scene, actually. I remember the wires getting crossed a bit here, because initially the scene was supposed to be the beginnings of a Riker Dr. Crusher romance subplot.
Right.
I mean, Riker, he's a womanizer.
Crusher, she's a woman.
She's a woman. Would have been interesting because, obviously Picard kind of has the hots for her.
Right.
We would have seen a little bit of Riker-Picard tension.
It would have been an interesting power struggle, because, Riker would have had the upper hand in this romance arena, but of course Picard has the upper hand as captain of the ship, and it kind of like reverses their standing a bit, because they would go on the bridge and do work, and Picard would be telling Riker what to do, and then, in their off time, when they're vying for Dr. Crusher's feelings, that, Picard would or Riker would be outstanding in putting Picard down. So
right.
It would have been an interesting dynamic.
Fun idea, but that's ultimately why it kind of never got filmed that way, because it would have been, I think they decided it would have been just a little too complex of a relationship for these two characters that were just introduced to the audience, 6 episodes ago?
Right.
A little too much drama for the bridge crew in a Star Trek show. So we had to kind of repurpose the scene. And so we replaced it with that mother-son scene that you see now when you watch the episode, just giving some minor exposition. But the awkward thing about it was that most of the dialogue was just repurposed without any real edits.
Yeah.
So the result is just a very strangely intimate scene between a mother and her son, complete with thigh touching,
right.
I might add. Which we suggested cutting and editing, but Gene put his foot down on that staying in. I remember Will wasn't too enthused.
Well, that was the problem, was that it had like the physical intimacy of it. So
yeah,
you could have kept the dialogue. It still would have been weird, but you could have kept it. But keeping the physical intimacy led to a lot of problems. Because after we had filmed the episode with the Traveler, Will Wheaton was very, very reluctant to be touched, I would say.
She was traumatized, basically.
Yes. And when we were filming this, whenever, Gates would have to, lightly and very cautiously put her hand on Will's thigh, he'd almost lose it. He'd break down sobbing. He'd be unable to say his lines. It was a clear sign of basically PTSD. Traumatized is a good way to put it.
It was tragic.
So
tragic to watch.
Gene had to step in. He's like, I'm going to be a fatherly figure for you, Will. I'll help you out. He takes Will by the shoulder, leads him away. They go off in another room, and ostensibly, I guess, to kind of help him overcome this kind of thing. So they come back. I don't know if it was like 2 hours later. Will's got like a new outfit on. Looking like a completely different guy. Just very calm. And Gene looks pretty satisfied with how he helped him. And, next time they ran the scene, just something as light as a touch on the thigh didn't even faze him. So,
yeah.
Gene's way with kids was just phenomenal.
And that's one thing you can't fault the man for. He really, really did a great job directing Will, even in future episodes.
And Will always responded a little differently to Gene's direction than anybody else's. Almost, I don't know if it was like a fear of reprisal, but it was a very instant learned response.
Yes, that is exactly how I would describe it.
Yeah. So, but I mean, thanks to Gene, we got that scene. We got it. It's in the final cut. I don't think that would have happened without him.
It absolutely would not have. Glad he was on set that day.
Well, it was a Thursday.
Oh yeah.
So they Crusher have this
Crusher
scene.
and Crusher.
And then I think the next thing to happen in the A plot is that the entity moves on to... No, it doesn't go to Picard. Not yet. Okay, now I remember. So it goes into the computer. And while it's in the computer, it tries to take control of the engines, and it monkeys around with the engine stuff, like in an effort to redirect the ship back to where it came from, because it's trying to get home. And this creates a lot of problems in the engine room. And this is where we meet like a brand new character. Series loves throwing new characters in here. The I don't know, was he chief engineer or just an engineer? I think he was just an engineer.
I think he was just an engineer, but I'm not sure if that was ever specified. I think it might have been intentionally vague. Well, so they do mention Argyle by name, our beloved chief engineer Argyle.
We do love him.
We honestly, what a great guy. Great actor. Really just stand up, dude.
Great pattern.
But wonderful pattern. Honestly, my favorite pattern to put on sweaters. Sweater vests. I can't speak well enough about Argyle, but the astute viewer will note that he's only mentioned by name in this episode for some reason, and that's because the writers had introduced a new element that kind of was supposed to have much longer legs than it got, and that is the Indian engineer that we meet in this episode. He was going to be the one actually promoted to chief engineer after Geordi got passed up.
Right.
It was kind of snuck in by the writers as like an FU to Gene for his racially based decision making from past episodes.
Right. Long-time Readier Room fans will remember the story of Geordi's chief engineering hopes.
Yeah. And good for the writers, right?
Right.
And Gene actually eventually came around on this, citing the engineer's race as, and I quote, fitting for the engine room. I guess more so than Geordi.
Yeah, he wanted Geordi to work in the kitchen, but we had to keep explaining to Gene that because of replicators, there is no kitchen.
There is no kitchen, yes. And yeah, wow, that was a constant fight for the first few episodes. But we were actually looking pretty good with this new Indian character. It was cool. We had a new, minority representative character, great actor, had a lot of room to grow, and then disaster struck. Because one day on set, you'll obviously remember this entire story, but for the audience, there's this little elevator in engineering in that circular room around what I assume is some kind of main engine device.
Yeah, we see it in the very first episode. And again in this episode.
Yeah, it's just this little elevator. Really no railings or anything. Just from looking at it, you can tell it's unsafe. So one day on set, the actor for the Indian engineer, he's riding the elevator as planned, and he just falls right out of it.
Tumbles.
It was quite the drop. Like, it may not look like it on TV, but that was a good few meters right there, because he fell out of it right from the top. And it was bad enough for him to break his leg. And so he's down there on the ground, just screaming, cursing, blaming every other person on the set. He was angry enough that he completely disavowed the show and just refused to appear.
Right.
So we were forced to kill him off in a bit of creative editing later on in the episode. That was kind of tough. We had to find a lookalike, give him a wig and everything.
Luckily, the entity in this episode was all just special effects, so it wasn't anything that we had to have him there to shoot with. We can just add the blue lightning in post. And
thankfully it wasn't super obvious or anything. When you go back and rewatch it, like, now that you know this, yes, you might be able to kind of point out the scenes where that's not the same actor. But for someone watching it for the first time on TV, I think we did a great job. But luckily that elevator was removed not too long after, lest it claim the lives of any other characters with big things ahead of them.
It's a shame, because I liked that elevator. I always thought it was kind of quaint in its design. You look at it, and there's nothing as cute on any other set in TNG.
It really is quaint, because it's just an elevator. It's just an industrial kind of piece of crap elevator.
Right. And because you think about the lifts that they use, or whatever they call them, turbo lifts, maybe. And those are like a very futuristic take on elevators. And this is like a very antiquated take on them. Like, this is the kind of thing you'd expect to see in like a 1950s factory or something. 1940s.
Right. You can picture someone standing at the base of it, cranking a lever as it slowly ascends.
Just like, not even fluidly. It stops and goes with that person's effort.
Right.
But it's that story is interesting to me, because it starts with his inclusion on the show, which a lot of people were really happy with, right? They were happy to have the diversity added to the show in the form of an Indian. But that attitude did not extend equally to all races and minorities. So in this episode we have the second appearance of Colm Meaney as the Irish. I think he was an ensign. I'm not sure of his rank, but so
I think in this one he was some kind of security personnel.
I think so. But whatever he is, he's on this episode too. And anytime Colm was on set, just the Irish jokes and insults and prodding came from everyone. At this time of Hollywood, that sentiment, anti-Irish, was still incredibly high. It took a very long time for that to deal out. Like, people would call him names behind his back. They'd call him names to his face. They call him Meanie the Mick. It was
Meanie the Mick.
It was really something. But it's amazing that this was able to sneak its way onto camera, like in the final cut. this prejudice. So in one episode, or one part of the episode, he's walking through the hallway and he encounters one of the two alien races that have their diplomats on board. This one is the lizard person, a Soleil was the name of his race. And he's walking along and he's like, oh, what is that doing on our deck? In reference to Colm. Like, why is there an Irishman on the deck? And that's hidden because you think that he's talking about the dog race, the other race of people. It was a very subtle, very prejudiced line to have in. And it's almost like a completely different show from the one where most of the cast, 99% of the cast, was celebrating the inclusion of an Indian. But it just goes to show that every war, or every battle in the racism war, is not created or fought the same way at the same time. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I honestly, I was just gonna say that little scene really is a bit of genius work in terms of just sneaking that dig in there. But it really is concerning the amount of anti-Irish sentiment there was back in the day.
I mean, he gets promoted to a often recurring cast member later on, and that attitude followed him almost all the way up until the end of the series run. Luckily, it subsided enough that they also put him on Voyager. They put his character there too.
Right. Yeah, I remember he had a lot less trouble on that show.
Right, because the history wasn't there.
Right.
The writers, the other actors, people working on set, they hadn't heard all the jokes, which at that point kind of became more just inside jokes rather than overt racism. You know, it's like, oh, remember that time we all, hated that you were Irish? It was pretty funny, right?
Right. Yeah. They kind of got old too. They kind of stopped being funny.
Yeah,
a lot of them.
It's you can only like have so many St. Patrick's days before you just get tired of assaulting somebody.
Right. And so luckily by the time Voyager rolled around, we were ready to move on to the Jews.
Right.
With that kind of stuff. So yeah.
It worked out. So that's like, we kind of haven't talked about their that B plot in a while, right? Kind of caught up in the A plot, but that's really because there's nothing to the B plot. It's just
nothing happened.
Right. It's just a lot of scenes of one of those two alien races hating the other one. Like there's at one point the Soleil, the lizard people, they have like not a noose, but something like a net that they use to hunt. And
some kind of light bright gummy worm thing.
Yeah, and they ensnare Riker in it, thinking that he's going to be one of the dog people passing by, and like, oh.
And the wonderful thing is he sees it coming. Like it's right in his line of sight.
Right, but the set was so small that we couldn't really put the camera and block the actors in a different way. Yeah. So that was unavoidable.
So yeah, the scene called for him to get caught.
Right. And nothing comes of that, of course. They weren't trying to catch Riker, but it's just an example of their feuding. And it's like, yes, it kind of escalates. There's that reference to eating meat. The lizard people are very, very violent in how they're trying to capture these guys, like ensnaring them by the neck. And first of all, they're not at all diplomats. I don't know how these people were hired to be diplomats by their respective races when neither of them is interested in any kind of diplomatic solution at all.
Yeah, if these are the diplomats, you really have to wonder what the rest of the race is like.
The rest of the race is just literally wild dogs and lizards with no intellectual capabilities.
These are just a handful of each race that has evolved enough to speak.
Yeah.
But we are actually treated to another meat scene with Yar, if you remember, with the dogs. So they really drove this point home.
Yar's only function in this episode is to interface with these two aliens. And it's very silly in how it plays out. Especially at the very end of the episode, which we might as well talk about that now. When Yar, so not to get to the end of the A plot, but the A plot's wrapping up and everybody's talking about that. And then Yar bursts into the room And she's like, "Oh, Captain, the dog alien are eating the lizard aliens." And Riker's like, "We don't really have time for this right now. Why don't you go take care of that yourself?"
Yeah. He says, "Can't this wait a moment?"
Yeah.
No? I'm sorry?
Our entire mission is to escort these guys, and they're eating each other.
They're not eating each other quite yet.
Oh.
So what happens is Yar comes in and tells them that the dog people requested the cook on the Enterprise. I can't talk today either, Mitch.
Oh my god.
Holy hell. The dog people request the cook on the Enterprise to whip them up some lizard person that they just freshly killed.
Oh, that's it. That's
right. Yeah. So we hadn't reached cannibalism just yet.
It's attempted.
And this is actually interesting. At this point, this is actually interesting because for all the hate mail we received for this cannibalism bit at the end here, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse because, this seems really abrupt. And that's because it was kind of reorganized last minute. So I remember this line being struck from the original script several times by the editors. This line about one race eating the other. Somehow it just kept sneaking its way back into the revised copies that would always end up in the actor's hands.
Somebody was a big fan of this idea.
Well, who was a big fan of this idea? Teleplay writer DC Fontana.
Oh no.
Interesting enough, she also wrote The Naked Now.
Well, that explains a lot.
Yeah. So even considering all this, we actually got off lucky here because her original script was going to treat the audience to an extended scene of one of the dog people, the Antiquans. That's it, the Antiquans, having failed to gain the cooperation of the Enterprise's cook, slowly eating a live Sele whole as it begged for mercy.
A little too rated R.
It was not only was the concept just extremely bizarre, we had to remind Fontana several times that this would just be physically impossible for the actors to perform. And that after about a dozen or so reminders here, she finally acquiesced to just omitting the scene completely. But somehow that cannibalism line was still kept in, and the questionable presence of a cook on the Enterprise remained completely unaddressed.
So it's funny because this could have, if this idea was pitched later on in the series run, we could have done it. Do you remember, I think it's a season 6 episode, Data's having all these weird dreams, and one of them, he had dreams of Troy as like a cake Troy.
Yes, that's right, Cake
right.
Troy.
Right. We could have used the Cake Troy technology to make this scene happen, like those kind of special effects.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
But
that was groundbreaking at the time, that Cake Troy technology.
Exactly. Now this might be a case of just someone who's a visionary being way too ahead of their time to properly execute what becomes commonplace later on.
That's true. I mean, the line between genius and insanity is very thin.
Incredibly thin.
Yeah. I really do want to just really harp on this cook on the Enterprise bit, though, because I'm not sure what we're supposed to be taking out of this. Like, is there a full-time cook on the Enterprise? Did they hire a cook to accommodate the dog people?
It just doesn't make sense, though, because there's other examples of cooks being on starships that have replicator technology, and I can't rationalize it within the lore of the show.
I mean, we do get a bit in one episode where Riker cooks something, right?
Yeah, but why would he have like an oven or a stove or something? Like, why?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Why would they bother installing that kind of thing?
Right.
I mean, I guess at this point in human development, I guess it's just like more of a hobby. It's just like a quaint little hobby, you know. I know how to cook.
There's always these references to replicated food and drink not being quite like the real thing. In fact, the Antikins say that about meat in this episode. I remember there's references to how, like, when they had a group of Irish people on board and they wanted to get really drunk, they were like, "Oh, you're replicated synthahol. That's not good stuff. That's not going to do it."
Yeah.
But because the nature of a starship in space, like, even if you cook something yourself, your ingredients are still going to be replicated. Like, where are you going to get those? You're going to go to the Arboretum and pick some vegetables? Like, no.
Well, I guess it is the difference though between, you know, having the ingredients and deliberately making something versus, you know, computer make me chicken marsala, you know.
I don't know.
Is the computer chicken marsala going to be better or worse than the human crafted chicken marsala?
Well, you would tell it the exact composition of.
Like, I guess you could do that.
So
yeah,
that's the thing. Like, anything replicated is not based off of like an image or an idea. It's based on how that was chemically composed, and I assume it takes a sample of the real thing, because they always say, "Oh, we can't make this. Our computer doesn't have any information on it." So if, let's say, you make chicken marsala by hand, and then you give that to the replicator to scan, it's going to scan it the way that you've made it.
So, okay, here's a thought. What if the replicator, you know, is kind of, you know, standard issue and only has standard database entries that are approved by the Federation? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Which does kind of make one ask the question why they wouldn't just get a bunch of world-class chefs together.
Right, and then just load up their databases with...
Right. So even that proposition kind of makes this whole concept fall flat on its face.
I wonder if this idea is explored more in Voyager, because Voyager has a character whose role on the ship is the cook.
Right.
Or maybe they just sidestep it and don't talk about it at all.
Much like here.
These things ring in a very dissonant way in the world of Star Trek, which is otherwise like pretty logically put together.
Yeah, it's akin to the issue you brought up a couple episodes ago, where language doesn't work quite the way it should.
Right. Yes.
And anyone who thinks critically for even just a moment will easily poke holes in the universal translator.
But I think that...
which does kind of take you out of it sometimes.
I think that the universal translator is something that I'm more... So I was the one who complained about that, of course, but I think it's something I'm more likely to overlook or forgive or suspend my disbelief for, because communication is just key to storytelling. Like, that's something you can't really get around.
Oh, yeah. It's non-negotiable.
Right. But just mentioning a cook is so irrelevant to basically all of the stories of the show.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I'll kind of, you know, bang you, dock you points for this one because you chose to do this when you didn't have to.
Right. So I think in conclusion, it makes sense that people would pursue cooking, you know, on their own individual terms, but having a professional cook on the Enterprise is definitely questionable in many ways.
Yes. So, like, Riker cooking for somebody for a date, I can... that makes sense. That's not logically inconsistent. But hiring a cook to consume resources on your military exploration starship, I cannot abide by.
So, I mean, we already touched upon the idea that the food does not taste as good out of the replicator.
Yes, or it doesn't taste the same. I don't know if it's...
doesn't taste the same.
Yeah. I think
right.
Troy
so
comments on this too with, like, chocolate.
With that in mind, Well, now I'm kind of curious how all these characters know what quote real food tastes like if we've entered a society that uses replicators so often.
Well, I don't know if they
But
use replicators so often on like the home level.
oh yes, it would make sense to only be using them mostly on the ships, right?
Right. Maybe
I
it's
mean,
like a luxury. It's like, oh, we saved up, we bought a replicator, and now mom doesn't have to cook, kind of thing. Like similar to
right.
buying a dishwasher, I guess.
Well, they're not going to buy anything because it's a post scarcity society,
Oh, that's true.
right? So it's like that wouldn't really be the thing. I think maybe it's more like by stocking up on replicators on starships, you don't need to make you don't need to make stops for like food supplies or anything. Nothing goes bad.
What do the replicators run off of? Like, don't they have like some kind of something that fuels them? Because they can't just create matter out of nothing, right?
I don't know. Maybe the dead souls of children they have locked up in the depths of the Enterprise. I'm not really sure.
I think there's an in-lore explanation for this, but God knows I don't know.
I mean, there must be. There must. I mean, it's Star Trek. There's something on Memory Alpha. Don't worry. We'll have to do some research on that because we as the crew weren't really privy to that deep kind of explanations for
because maybe
clear plot conveniences.
Maybe he gets a throwaway line once, and it's like if you're not in the right place at the right time on set to hear it, then
you're not gonna know.
Right, but we'll do some research. If it involves reading the novels, then we will not do some research.
All right, so let's move back a little bit because what we were just talking about was the very end of the episode, the point where the episode closes at a very abrupt time. So let's move back and continue the A plot here.
So we had left off with the engineer dying.
Yeah, the engineer dies, having contracted which is interesting that it kills him. So yeah. Here's the fun thing about the way this interacts with everyone. It knocks Worf out. It possesses Crusher to go to the bridge. It kills the Indian guy.
And then Picard.
Possesses Picard. Note here, it possesses the only two white people.
Food for thought.
Definitely. Now, how does Picard get possessed?
Picard,
right?
He's on the bridge. At this point, the entity is inside the ship's computer, and he goes over to talk to Geordi at the helm, and he like puts his hand on the console, in a very like unnatural way.
Yeah, and it's framed in such a way that we are, It's telling us to pay attention to the fact that he's put his hands on this computer console in a way that no one in the show has ever done or will ever do again. Right.
Unless they need to be possessed by something.
Right. In which case, in this case, he is possessed by something.
And Blue Lightning.
The Blue Lightning. And he immediately orders the ship to reverse course back to the blue cloud of energy.
Which I think this is the best part of the episode.
It definitely is.
All of this stuff with Picard being possessed by an alien entity and all of the crew not really knowing how to handle that is genuinely interesting, I believe.
Yeah. Not only is it interesting from the crew perspective, but also you kind of see a little bit of Picard's weakness here where, the combined entity of him and the Blue Lightning was not lying when they said that all he really cares about is, like, exploring stuff.
Right.
So you can definitely see why Picard would actually acquiesce to an alien like this and just say, yeah, screw it. I'll leave if I can go explore these uncharted parts of space. You can see where that little weakness would allow him to kind of be overcome by this alien's desire to go home.
Right, and that's what makes the entire dynamic between Picard and the crew as interesting as it is, because Picard is not like possessed by a murderous alien. He's not going to kill anybody or put their lives in danger. He's just, I'm resigning and I'm going to go do this other thing with my life. Like, can you really stop me from doing that? I haven't harmed anybody. I'm just resigning myself.
And it's interesting because he's not necessarily even entirely possessed. They've just become like a whole entirely new consciousness, which is really cool.
Yeah, he always uses the pronoun "we" for describing things because they're both in there. Now,
and he does act much in the same way. It's just he's like, his actions to the crew are very suspicious.
Right. Now, I like that this takes place really early in the show's run, because it kind of has this element of, well, these people don't really know Picard super well. They haven't been together for a very long time. So if he's going to start acting strangely, they don't have so much ground to stand on in, like, oh, this isn't Picard.
Right.
So it's like I said, it's pretty neat. The thematic elements of this also are relatively deep. Like, there's the one scene where Picard's in his office and he gets confronted by Riker and Crusher, who want to do some tests on him because they've noticed how he acts strangely, and Picard kind of shuts them down. And that whole scene has like a very real life inspiration to it. So at the time,
that's right.
So at the time, Gene's mental health was deteriorating.
God bless him.
God bless him. Really a victim to typical dementia symptoms. They were ultimately responsible for him leaving the show's production later on. But by this point, the signs were blossoming, and people in the know knew about it. Everybody else, very hush-hush, you don't talk about it, especially not to him. But the writers wanted to kind of reach out to Gene, put this scene in of Crusher and Riker, who are really worried about Picard's mental state, begging him to submit to some examinations and tests. And Picard, of course, shuts them down. And the idea is that the audience, the reader of the scripts, would feel very helpless, very hopeless. Like, oh no, Picard, can't you see what's happening to you? We're trying to help. And this would reach out to Gene in a way. And now, unfortunately, Gene completely failed to grasp the nuance of the scene. It might have been a bit of willful ignorance. Obviously, we can't be sure. But, unfortunately, we know how that ended up going.
Yeah. When you look at it this way, it's a bit of a tragic scene, really. As we all know, Picard eventually comes back to the ship, but eventually Gene did not.
Right. But and you know what? That's the part of the episode I dislike. Maybe I'm colored by how Gene's story went and how Gene couldn't come back, but Picard did. But Picard coming back after beaming out into space, into becoming an energy entity, always felt kind of cheap to me. I didn't like it.
It's very cheap. It makes no sense.
It doesn't. And it's a shame because it comes at the tail end of this really cool story, which is based entirely just on character interactions and emotional drama, and it's solved by science fiction magic. It's like, oh, reconstitute him with our teleporters.
And that's the thing. It is essentially just magic,
right?
And Trek is, supposed to be above that. This really doesn't fall in line with what we understand to be the functions of the transporter.
No. It's it's just an ass pull. And there had to have been a better way. Like, just to write the story where Picard doesn't end up teleporting
Beaming
out.
off.
And I
Yeah.
don't remember if there was a commercial break there and it was supposed to ratchet up the drama before break or not, but yeah, it kind of painted the scenario into a corner where there's no satisfying way to fix the situation.
Yeah. Really all they had to do was figure out a way to keep Picard on the Enterprise while also being somehow separated from the alien.
Right.
Which, I mean, I can see being difficult in its own way. But, yeah, completely getting rid of his body and then reconstituting it was ridiculous.
I think what they could have done is to have, and this is just like 5 seconds of thinking. They're like, okay, we're gonna use some subterfuge and trick Picard, and it's like, oh, all right, Picard, we'll beam you out. We understand you resign, we support you, and then whoever's manning the console kind of pulls some trickery where they're like, all right, beam Picard out, keep track on the signal, separate the two energy streams, pull Picard back, like whatever.
Yeah. You know what? That's a good point. It lines up with what we talked about the previous episode, where these plots where the Enterprise crew does not really solve things on their own do tend to be a little flat, and that's actually pretty much what happened here with the crew and their conflict with Picard, is that they talk to each other about it, they confront him, and then they do nothing.
Right.
And it just kind of resolves itself.
It's like,
and
luckily
I think
Picard went to the right place in space, and they
right. Yeah, exactly. It's all just like plot contrivances. So that's actually a really good compromise. Is have them trick the entity that is now the alien and Picard combined, and separate Picard from it. I think that's a really good idea.
It's something. Whereas what we kind of have is more of nothing.
Nothing, yeah. I do want to note as well that plots like this are pretty interesting to me, because as an audience, you're dealing with like a new Star Trek crew and everything. Riker is a fairly strong character, I would say. He's number one. He's obviously a Kirk stand-in. So very familiar to longtime watchers of Trek at this point, right? He's very he's kind of copied from the face of Trek, really.
Yeah.
And so when you get these episodes where it seems like Picard is just gonna kick it early on here, a lot of the times you would almost believe it. Like,
yeah,
you could almost see him completely leaving the cast and Riker becoming captain.
He's kind of primed to take over.
Yeah, he's always primed to take over. And so, and it is exactly that relationship, and that the fact that character is so strong that when Picard is in danger, you feel it. I mean, nowadays maybe not so much, because if you pay any attention to the Next Generation at all, Picard lives through the whole thing. But watching this kind of stuff on TV, you would absolutely believe, Picard could just be gone at any time. And this happens a couple times.
I think the culmination,
within the first few seasons.
The culmination of this is the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's like a Riker-centric episode where the theme is what he's going to do with his life. And then Picard is in this very precarious situation. And, of course, Riker's in a position where he could solve that situation essentially by killing Picard. And thinking about that story in a vacuum, it's very believable. Now, when it's framed in such a way that, like, oh, Riker's gonna make the key decision right before we cut between two seasons, it would almost be almost melodramatic in a way to kill off Picard, like, at the beginning of one season rather than at the end of the other.
Yeah, that's true.
So
that's definitely true.
These kind of things, they're thematically, one can readily believe that Picard would be in danger and that Riker might take over. But I feel like very often they're sunk by the logistics of television episodes, seasons, commercial breaks, hiatuses, where, you know, you do a little more thinking about it. And granted, you know, in today's world, people are very keyed into, like, oh, random news story, this person signed on for 3 more seasons of this show, or, you know, whatever. But back in the 80s, that information was a lot harder to come by. And people didn't think about production as much because you had to go looking for details on that rather than just having it blasted at you. And
yeah, it's definitely a lot more accessible now.
Yeah. So I agree. And I like that about Riker. I like that Riker could just be the main character. Like, he's got enough going on, while we also have a very strong lead character in Picard.
Yeah.
I don't think the two clash for screen time or anything, or wanting to see one but not the other. It's two very strong elements that work very harmoniously. Yeah,
which I think that's one of my favorite parts about TNG is that relationship between those two characters, because you always want to see more of them.
Right. And I think the Riker episodes are some of my favorite, and then
they're without a doubt the best episodes of the show.
Then basically every other episode Picard has a strong presence in, so you really get both.
Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah, we
kind of covered it.
Yeah, that's about it. Picard comes back. He gets reconstituted by the transporter. Yar runs in, exclaims that the two delegate parties that they were supposed to transport are eating each other, and Riker tells her to fuck off.
It's a wonderfully constructed ending, because you can picture like a sitcom where the camera freeze frames and some like cheesy theme plays. It's like da da da. The Picard
Yar's looking directly at the camera.
Yeah, Yar runs in. The two delegates are eating each other. Da da da. Cut the credits.
Oh my god, that would have been a better ending.
It would have been.
Honest.
But yeah, because that's the last emotion you have watching this show is, why doesn't Riker care about this? Why is this not important?
Yeah, it leaves you with very mixed feelings about the episode. And yeah, I think in conclusion, the episode was not so great.
No,
but it wasn't the worst.
It wasn't.
It was definitely not the previous episode. But
I'll take an episode that's like 50% above average and 50% like really bad, rather than one that's like all mediocre. Yeah. I think I agree with that. I had fun watching this episode. It was kind of funny in all the wrong ways, but it like you said, it did have that A plot had a pretty strong base to it. Yeah.
So
that anchored my positive feelings for it. But if there's nothing else to say on this episode, we'll have to bid the lonely among us a nice farewell into its energy cloud.
Do you want to plug our email address, and what would that be?
That's a great point. Our email address is thereadierroom@gmail.com. That's a capital T, capital R, and another capital R in the Readier Room. Feel free to send us any questions that you may or may not have. And we'll
comments,
answer them.
Anything.
Oh, comments,
anything, really.
Constructive criticism, deconstructive criticism. It's all good. And we'll answer them right on the show.
Yeah. So looking forward to that.
Oh, very much so. And until next time, everybody, please stay ready.
The troublesome little man-child.
Consider that in the history of many worlds, there have always been disposable creatures.
Do you consider yourself superior to us?
Should have told him to mind his own damn business.
But I stroked the beard thusly. Do I not appear more
probe.
It's not a promising beginning.